Hi guys, it's Jeff here, the photographer's mentor. So in this live, I'm going to be joined by Graham. Now, Graham is from Copyright Correct, and he's a copyright infringement specialist. So he deals with any forms of copyright infringement. If somebody's using your images or a third party is using your images, and we're going to talk about all sorts of stuff copyright related. What is it? What are your rights? How can you protect yourself? What happens if somebody is you found that somebody is using your images, or quite often in the case of us photographers, we might sell our images to a client and then find that a third party is using those images and they don't have the rights to use them. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation because it's something I don't know a lot about myself. I have had this happen to me. I have experienced it happen on a number of occasions. And funny enough, I actually had, when I had the wedding business with my business partner a few years ago, well, it was when we were quite early into the business. We had quite a number of images taken from our website by another photographer used on his website. And then quite ironically, he took the text off our website as well and copy and pasted that into his website. So if you've had experiences of this, or if you have any questions to ask, please feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll bring the questions up with Graham as we're going through this. So I'm just going to bring Graham in now and he can introduce himself.
Hey everyone, Graham here.
Hi Graham, you okay? So you keeping well?
Yeah. Probably know some of you, but not all of you. And so here to talk about copyright. So stay awake if you can.
So how long have you been doing this? You've been into copyright for how long? How many years?
I've been working with, I'm not a photographer. I don't know one end of a camera from another, which is quite ironic, really, because I've been working with photographers and photography for, 25 years now. So I started off working with specialist photography-led stock libraries. So not your Gettys, not your Shutterstocks, not your big sort of generic libraries, very small photographer-led libraries. One was food and drink. One was plants, agriculture, and animal photo libraries. And in that time, you work closely with photographers. And so I got more and more involved with working with contracts with photographers, sort of on the commission side of things. And also when we swapped from transparencies, if anyone can remember that.
Yep. Alan Green will be able to, because Alan Green should say hello.
Yeah. So, I got more and more involved with copyright infringement. And then our lovely daughter Molly came along and we moved to Devon and I set up on my own. And now I work with photographers working with writing contracts and primarily with copyright infringement as well. So, but my background is with stock libraries, but not the big, horrible sort of Gettys, Shutterstocks.
Yeah.
Small little libraries, the nice little ones, the specialist ones.
So with regards to, going in at the basics. So what effectively is copyright? Is copyright automatic? So if I go out and take a picture of something and then put that onto social media, is that mine? That is because I took the picture. Is that my copyright? Because you see things now, if you go into like Google and you go into check usage rights, you see public domain. So is that a free for all? So yeah. So what is copyright effectively, and is it automatic?
No, well, yes, it is. It is automatic. That's the thing. And I was thinking about this last night, and it's interesting, isn't it? The word copyright, we use it all the time. Copyright. Our images are protected, so we have copyright. But if you think about the term copyright, I've never really thought about this. It's got the word copy in it, and right, which sounds almost that it's okay to copy your images. And we use this term so often, it's become sort of like the go-to term for protection of IP, intellectual property, which I actually think is a better term for it. IP is intellectual property is a better term than copyright, really. But we all use copyright, which is, this is by the side, really. That it is actually a strange idea, but copyrights. So in the UK, in America, you don't register copyright. You don't, the copyright is yours. From the moment you take that picture, the copyright is automatically yours. You don't register it. It's not like that's yours. You've taken the picture. The image is yours. You don't have to do anything else with it. So when you do a commission, when you're asked by a client and you're commissioned to take an image, you are in fact you're licensing those images. You're not giving away your copyright. You're not selling them the copyright. The images are yours. The client can use those images as they like, as long as it's within the terms of the license that you've given them. So you are licensing those images to them.
Mm-hmm.
And when you invoice them, a lot of photographers ask you sometimes, so, at what point do the images become theirs? Well, they don't ever actually become theirs unless you assign the copyright to them. When you invoice them, that acts as a license. You are giving them the license to use those images for the term that you decide. It could be 3 years, it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could be in perpetuity, where you give them the license to use the images for as long as they want. But the important thing is you own the copyright. No one can take that away from you.
And that copyright is indefinite for as long as the image exists, whether it.
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I'd admit that now. I'm not a solicitor. I've got a lot of experience with copyright. I've been dealing with it most of my life. And but I think it's 70 years, and it's 70 years after the death of the person who creates that image. But right. I mean, it shouldn't really come into effect. I think one of the interesting things is if we see some comments come up when a photographer is asked to shoot an image, you're licensing that image to the client to use. You're not giving them the image. As I said, you own the copyright. And in a contract, I always think some photographers give 5 years, they give 10 years, they give in perpetuity, and in perpetuity is quite an interesting concept, where you're giving your client, who you've shot the images for, the license to use those pictures for life. Basically, you can use them however you like for life. Some photographers give 5 years, some photographers give 10 years, and I kind of think, if I was a client, if I was commissioning a photographer, would I really want, after 5 years or 10 years, do I want to come back and re-license those images? I think to myself, well, I've already paid for those.
Yeah,
I've commissioned you. Why am I paying for them again after 10 years? And so I think, as a part of your contract, as part of your terms and conditions, that you should all. I think you should give in perpetuity, where you say, okay, those images are yours. They're yours to use under a license. You can't use them without certain parameters. And let's be honest, after 5 years, 10 years, they should be looking at reinvesting in new photography anyway. I mean, if there's any headshot photographers listening out there, unless they've taken an anti-aging drug, which would be great, you're going to want to get new pictures done anyway. And even if you're a product photographer, how long is your product going to last for? You're going to need new images, aren't you, at some point?
Yeah. And I think that's a very valid point. And I think sometimes you can go the other way. I mean, so one of the big things is, like photographers need to have a contract, because as soon as you issue that invoice and those images are sold effectively under license, there has to be something that written down somewhere to say what that effective license is, so that both the client and the photographer are made aware of it. But I think the other thing is, when you start going down, I always say to my clients, if you're going to shoot a job, you need to be well rewarded financially for the job you're doing, so that you get, you shoot the job, you feel that you've been compensated extremely well from the client. So you're not looking for, all right, well, I'm going to invoice them again another 2 years time for, because what you want to do is build that relationship with the client, so that the client's getting first class service, you're getting paid the right amount of money. Because I always think, it's a bit like if you went and bought a car and then you just about to sign the sales agreement, and the guy went, well, but you're not covered for driving on motorways, and then you'll have to come back every year and pay an extra X amount of money for this, because the car is only yours for a year, and then you've got to come back. So I think you've got to have that happy medium, haven't you?
I think I work for a lot of property and architectural photographers, and often they put a license in for their images for 5 years. And I think, well, actually, you've got to put yourself in the place of the client, and you think, if I was buying you to commission me shots for my property, would I in 5 years' time, am I going to want to come back and say to you, well, can I buy those images again, Graham? No. is it? And also, let's be honest, photographers, are you going to remember to contact each of your clients in 5 or 10 years' time and say, oh, by the way, you need to recommission, or you need to relicense these images, not recommission them, you need to relicense them. You're not going to. So I think that there's this term, and we use this a lot within copyright and contracts, is in perpetuity. And I think it's quite an important term, is that it's almost royalty free. You're giving your client the opportunity to use your images for as long as possible. Well, no, not long, but for as long as it needed. But I wouldn't get too het up about it, because in 5-10 years' time, you should want new images anyway. And there's an opportunity here for your photographers, Jeff, in that if you're a headshot photographer or a property photographer, for example, in 5 years' time, you should be having a little diary note there and saying, well, as I say, unless you've got some miraculous anti-aging drug, you need new shots done.
Yeah, totally. So when you create these images with, you create the images for the client, and you put them out there, you've done this contract, like obviously, so for like things like headshots, that isn't going to be really a problem. But then, like obviously some of the discussion today is going to be about copyright infringement. So when you do, like, say, for instance, you do a shoot for a building that's just been created by a construction company, but the license is to use for the construction company, and then you find that, I don't know, the roofers start using it, and then different third parties start using it. Is that what is termed as copyright infringement?
Yeah, I mean, yes. When you create your license, or when you have your terms and conditions in your contract, I'd say the single most important thing is, for most photographers, is to stop third-party use. Is that no one commits copyright. Well, most people, 99.9%, don't commit infringement on purpose. I mean, let's be honest. No one wants a fine. No one wants to receive a fine. Wake up on a Monday morning when you're having a cup of coffee and your first croissant and thinking, oh, excellent, just received a letter from a photographer and I need to pay a copyright infringement fine. Nobody does. So third-party use is a really interesting one, but it only seems to sort of attract certain areas of photography. So like architectural property photographers, for example, if you have a building and other people have worked on that building, say like the roofers, the people who've done the windows, the landscape gardeners, the engineers, it could be anyone. They'd all love images of that project. And, why wouldn't they? But at the end of the day, if they've got the budget, they should be commissioning a photographer to take pictures of that building themselves. And if they don't,
I know a classic example which I see a lot of, and you probably do yourself, and this is really big on social media. And I don't know if anybody who's watching's had this happen. If you have, pop it in the comments. But if you see, actually, funny enough, one of my local pubs, they're constantly posting on their Facebook page. They'll have a steak night, or they'll have and then there's a low resolution picture of a steak which isn't theirs. They've obviously just gone onto Google, done a search, and grabbed an image or grabbed an image off something else and used it because it's slightly pixelated. And obviously coming from, I had a food pub, and, we could buy licensing images from Star Breweries, which was Heineken, to use under, so they'd had the images created by a photographer, then they would sell them to their pubs to use on their social media. So we effectively were the third party then. So does this happen a lot, and what happens if you find that somebody is doing it?
Oh, it happens so much. I mean, I going back to my photo library days, I remember the day, transparencies. You didn't see infringements because of transparency had to be sort of sent out to a client, and then it was sent back again to the photo library, or the photographer sent out a load of transparencies or images, and they came back. The digital age is amazing. For photographers, it's brilliant. It makes life so much easier for you guys. You can shoot, you can sort of download your images, you can work on them, the raw files and the TIFFs and the JPEGs, and do whatever you need to do. But when it was transparent, you didn't see infringements. Unless you were really lucky. Let's say you happened to pop into a pub and you opened a menu and you saw your images looking at you in the face. Unless you saw that, I mean, you wouldn't have seen an infringement. I mean, if you'd have told me some 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, there'd be companies that are set up purely to work on infringements like CopyTrack, Image Rights International, that they're purely working and making a profit out of copyright infringement. And so photography now is everything is shared. So the digital age didn't, in some ways, under the infringement sort of rule, didn't do photographers any favors at all, because images are shared, they're used on social media, used on websites, they're used everywhere. So images are shared. And so the potential for copyright infringement is increased within the 10 years. I mean, it's just gone huge. I mean, that's I'm sure people listening today is not they don't want to listen to me warbling on. It's about copyright, and so because of social media, because of the electronic age, because of digital imagery, images are shared, and that creates so many images. And you mentioned, Jeff, about, say, third-party use. So you take photographers who are working for you, and they take a picture of a beautiful roast dinner for a client who specializes in food photography, and then suddenly that image goes out there, and then you see a pub using it. They're using a roast dinner or lasagna or something else, and you see that image, and you think, well, how did they get it? Where did that image come from?
Just put it there, mate. Yes, I just put it there.
It's a copyright delivery.
It's an Amazon guy.
And so you see these images being used. So what do you do? I mean, this is happening more and more and more. Is it the opportunity to reuse images because they're now digital? You didn't see it under the days of transparency, because you sent the transparency to a client and the transparency came back to you. But now your image goes to a client, it's digital. That client can share those images with whoever they like. And
I suppose you've got two different, because Mike's just said he's an architectural, put my glasses on, he's an architectural photographer, and third-party usage is the single most frustrating part of the job. It's impossible to control.
Yeah.
But I suppose you have two particular types of this. So you have, like, the people from my local pub who pretend, it's the first pub they've ever had. I mean, some of the images that they put up there, you can see the Shutterstock images. I don't think it does their brand any good at all, really. Because they should be getting images created of their actual food. You see pizza shops doing that with generic images on their menus. But so those, I say, sometimes maybe people who really don't understand the full thing about it. But then you've got the other one, which is a direct third party, like potentially in Mike's case, where. And I know Alan Green does a lot of work for architectural as well, where you have about 4 or 5 different parties who are interested, who have interest in the finished thing. So you've got, is there a difference between tracking an infringement? I suppose it's easy to track an infringement from the third party, but harder from somebody who's just grabbed something off the internet. I imagine that's quite hard to track.
I think there are certain areas of photography that attract infringements more than others. So say if you are a property architectural photographer, I mean, yes, you see more infringements. Food photographers, nature, plants, flora and fauna. These sort of images seem to attract infringements more than others. Musicians, musical photographers seem to attract them. So the example would be, so the architectural photographer is, they've shot a project, they've shot a school, a library, or a well-known building. But the thing is, with those projects, there are other people involved in that project. So you get, as I said, the engineers, the landscape gardeners, whoever else. And so the photographer's been commissioned. Let's just say, for example, the architect has commissioned the photographer, and they then get contacted by the landscape gardener, the person who's done the windows, the person who's done the flooring, or one of the engineers. They think, oh, we need images of this building. And the architect then sends them the images and goes, yeah, I own the copyright. I've commissioned a photographer to shoot these images, so I'm okay to send you these images. And then it just hits the fan. Nobody wins because the people
So,
who
so
use
in just can I just stop you in there? So in that case, who is actually in breach of the copyright? Is it the architect because he's sent them
no,
out, or is it the guy who's using the images?
no, it's the guy under UK copyright law. The end user, whether you think it's fair or not, is responsible for the images being used on their website or whatever social
Is
media
that because it's
platform.
his duty? Is that because it's his duty to see if the images are
Yes.
copyright?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So say for example, we need images of the building we've worked on. So we think, well, who do we phone? Let's phone the architect. Have you got any images? Yes, I've had a photographer commissioned to shoot my building. I own the copyright, or I think I've got. Even if I don't think I own the copyright, I own the rights. I have the right to send you these pictures. So they pop them over to the one of the contractors, and the contractor goes, brilliant. I've got the images. I use them on the website, and so, but under UK law, whether you like it or not, the end user is responsible for the images that they use on their website. So whether or not they've done it maliciously, or or they've done it purely by good faith, they've contacted the architect or whoever commissioned the images, and they've said, I want to use these images on my website. Okay, is that okay? But it's up to the end user to check, is that the case? Can you use them?
I suppose that's a classic case in UK law, though, isn't it? That negligence isn't an excuse. You should do your due diligence before you actually do anything.
Do you know what, Jeff? It's really difficult sometimes because I work with a lot of property photographers, and you call, you email rather than call because you want everything put in written record rather than calling. So you contact they've supplied the windows. You contact them and say, look, you're using these images on your website. You've been using them for the last 2 years. You've not got any authorization from the photographer. You've not got you have no license to use these images. So what happens is they come back. More often than not, they contact the people who've supplied the images to them. So that will quite often be the people who've commissioned the images in the first place. So that could, let's just say for argument's sake, that's the architect. So the architect have commissioned a photographer. They've passed the images on to the window, the people, the client who did the company did the windows, and they're thinking, well, I've practiced due diligence. I think I've done the right thing. I've contacted the people who I think own the images. They've passed the images on to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm from one of the many copyright infringement companies like Pick Scout, Image Rights International. They send them a letter and they go, well, I've got a letter. I'm suddenly getting a bill for quite a considerable amount of money for using images I thought were okay to use. So what happens then is, and I put a post recently on LinkedIn saying the photographer isn't the bad guy, because then the original client will contact the photographer and say, what the bloody hell are you playing at? I've asked you to shoot these images. I've shared them with whatever, this client, and now you're contacting them and asking for money. And the photographer, and it really upsets me actually, is the photographer ends up looking like the bad guy because they're asking one of the architects, let's say, for example, clients, one of the contractors for a copyright infringement. And you can lose clients over this. It's really difficult. It's a photographer.
So I think in that case, it's your duty as the photographer to make sure, first of all, you have a really good contract, but secondly, you in the contract itself and also on the invoice, you could put it on the end of the base of the invoice to say that these images are supplied under license for, and then put the name under the company to be used in your PR and sales material or whatever, and you can restate that on the invoice so that I think from our point of view as photographers, the communication element needs to be there between us and the clients as well. So to save that scenario where the client comes back and says, "Oh, hang on a minute, what's this? One of the builders getting a telling off for using the images. I thought they were mine." So I think part of it falls to educate them as well.
It's not just a telling off. I mean, we're looking at quite. Let's look at the fees here. I mean, there's a fee for using the image. So basically, the photographer can charge what they would generally charge for promotional website usage. So and then they usually won't credit a photographer, so that you can charge for non-credit. So under UK copyright law, every photographer is entitled to be credited for their work. If you're not credited, that's a copyright infringement as well. It's an infringement of your moral rights. It's not a copyright infringement. It's an infringement of your moral rights. So say, for example, let's talk sums. Say, for example, you charged £250 for website usage. So someone who's used your picture on a website, you can charge £250, £500. If that's what you normally charge, £500, £250. Non-credit, another 100%. So that's double that. There's also something in intellectual property law called flagrancy, is if you can prove that that person should have known better, if that person is using images knowing that they should have bought a license, you can also charge flagrancy, which is up to, again, you can add whatever you think is appropriate for that case. So you can have initial use, no credit, using the image when you should have known better, and that, we're talking substantial fees here. So, we're talking £1,500 possibly without buying a license. This is big money. But what I would always suggest...
So I think in that case, obviously, the first, if you're thinking of it in logical steps, and especially if somebody hasn't got a license in the first place. So the first thing is make sure you've got that contract that explains the length of the license, who the license is for, that it is not used or it is used for third parties. That's made aware with the client when they sign the contract, and it is made aware with the client when they pay the invoice or it's put on the invoice, so that you're taking away the possibility of this happening unknowingly, because you don't want to upset somebody. So then that then says, if you're trying to track and trace images, then these people's are then used knowingly because they're being educated by, or they're being taken from a website. So in that case, how do you track and trace your images? So imagine that the third party usage, you manage to educate your clients. You've got that strictly in your terms and conditions. It's on your invoice as well, and your clients are educated. How do you track your images once those images go out there to make sure people aren't breaching this?
Well, I think if every photographer is listening now, I think quite an interesting thing to do is a bit of DIY, bit of Google image search is the first thing I would do. So if there's a headshot photographers listening here, it's probably not quite as relevant to them because their images are very specific to that person, so they're not going to be used anywhere else. But if you're a food photographer, a property photographer, gardens, you shoot musicians, pop on into Google Images, do a reverse image search. So go to Images, upload your image into Google, and choose 5. Just choose 5 of your images. So say let's take you're a food photographer. So
so how do you do a reverse image search? So how would you do that?
Don't ask me that. I think so. Google, you click the image button. There's a picture of a camera, and then you simply upload an image. It really is.
Right. So it takes, so it's taking the ID from that image as well as the physical images.
So when you do a Google search, you can do it by terminology, and then you've got on the right. I think on the right there's a picture of a little camera there, and you click on that, and it does say upload image. So you pop an image up. So let's say. I'd be really interested talking to photographers actually and say, okay, let's take your top 5. Let's take 5 images. Let's say if you're a food photographer or a property photographer, and let's do a roast dinner, a lasagna, a prawn cocktail, a glass of champagne, and I don't know, something else. And you pop them into Google image search. Have a look to see who's using your images.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, Alan Green's just posted there, and Alan does a lot of landscapes as well as properties, and I've seen lots of the Tyne Bridge, the Tyne Bridge in Newcastle. It's an iconic bridge, or you got the Angel of the North, I wonder how many other people have used Alan's Angel of the North or
Yeah.
Time Bridge image.
I think you can get a bit carried away with it. So all I'm saying to photographers is don't stick in 20, 30, 40. I tell you what, choose one image. So like Alan just mentioned the Tyneside Bridge. It's an iconic bridge.
Yeah.
Everyone knows it around the world. Just stick that one in and work slowly down and think to yourself, blimey, who's using this? And then you can see who's using your image. You will know very quickly if you've issued a license to those people to use that or not. I would say in Alan's case, unlikely, because if he was commissioned by a company, then they've not had third-party rights. And so anyone else who's using it is fair game for copyright infringement. So you can do it yourself. Then you can write a letter. But I wouldn't be, never be too threatening. Just remember, most people who commit copyright infringement haven't done it on purpose. It's not malicious. I'm not saying that isn't always the case. Some people do it knowing full well that, they're committing copyright infringement and they're hoping to get away with it. But a lot of the people who use these images, they're small companies. They might even be individuals, Jeff. They're not big people. So to sort of write them a very aggressive letter and say, you've done this, you've used my image without authorization, I'm going to charge you this, it's going to absolutely horrify them.
Yeah. Funny enough, Patrick's just said, you're talking about headshots. Patrick's given a really good example that just made me think, so say, for instance, you're working for a particular company, you're working for a recruitment company, they paid for your headshot because they got the stuff headshots done, got a photographer in, you work there for another 3 or 4 months, and then you find a better job. And you go on to the next job, but you take that headshot with you to use on your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
So effectively, you are now in breach of copyright with that headshot because it doesn't belong to you; it belongs to the company, even though the pictures of you.
Yeah. Well, because unless that individual has commissioned you themselves to take the images of them personally, so they can use as images when they move on to whatever various positions they do. Whereas if you've been commissioned by a company, the photographer, let's not forget this, the photographer owns the copyright. Secondly, you've been commissioned by a particular client, so this should be in your terms and conditions. If that person then leaves and they want to then set up on their own, for example, they become a freelancer. Well, why should they be using the images which have been paid for by the company they previously worked for to benefit their own enterprise? They shouldn't.
Yeah.
And this is all about education. As I say, no one commits copyright infringement intentionally. Well, I say nobody. Some people do. Of course they did. Some people go onto Google or whatever search engine and just think, there's an image, I'm going to right-click it, download it, and use it. So, as far as I'm concerned, you deserve all you get. But a lot of people don't do it on purpose. So this example you've just mentioned, I'm sure they didn't do it, they just thought that the images were theirs.
Yeah. But Patrick just says in his case, he gives the license to the company. But I think, from a photographer's point of view, if you found that, I suppose you could potentially go down one particular route where you write to the client and you say, notice that you, under the terms and conditions, that image was licensed to X company, now they're no longer. So you can either pay the license of £200 to use that image, or you can come in for a shoot and I'll do you a special discount on the next shoot or something like that. So you could go in with the hard sells and, this is what if you want to continue using it, or we have a great offer on new headshots this month. So you're making them aware, but then you're offering them a nicer sort of, do you know what I mean? You're not going in blazing saying you must do this and you must do that.
I think there's an opportunity here. You asked earlier, what were the ways of picking up on copyright? Is it, you can do it yourself, you can do a reverse image search, but there are companies out there. So, for example, CopyTrack, Image Rights International, PicScout, who will source, trace, and contact companies who are using your images without permission. But they work brilliantly. And if you want to have if you want to use them for non-UK infringements, they're perfect because they have agents all around the globe who can contact clients who are using your images without authorization around the world, because they have agents, solicitors, legal representation around different areas. But the only thing is, these companies, they go in sometimes all guns blazing. They go in with a very heavy letter. They say, like, okay, you've used this image, we're going to charge you X, Y, and Z. We're going to charge you a retrospective license for using the image. We're going to charge you for not crediting the image. We're going to charge you an unauthorized usage fee. And if you don't pay up, we're going to take you to court. And these people who get these letters think, Jesus Christ, I've just used an image. I make cupcakes in my kitchen in Clapham. I wasn't expecting this. And the other thing they do, they often don't follow up. So they get this letter, and because they have so many cases around the world, they don't follow up. So this person, can you imagine it, Jeff, if you received this letter and you think, blimey, I didn't know. I had no idea this is the case. And then you never hear anything ever again. You think, well, what was that all about?
Yeah.
Whereas I think, I think as a photographer, if you do it yourself, you're going to have a much better solution. You offer an amicable settlement fee. So you say, this is the fee. This is the fee for using the image. This is a retrospective license. So basically, you're issuing a license for using the image up until the point you have found them using the image. You're not issuing a future license. So they should remove the image there and then. The image should be taken off the website. They should be not using it anymore. You issue a license for non-credit, so your moral rights have been infringed. You issue a fee for flagrancy or unauthorized usage fee, and then you give them an amicable settlement fee. You say, okay, this is the fee, so we've charged you for these three things, but if you settle within 14 days, if you settle within 2 weeks, we'll only charge you for the usage fee up until now. We'll only charge you for the non-credit fee. We won't charge you any of these other fees, the unauthorized usage fee, the flagrancy fee. And quite often you will find that people will say, okay, all right, I'll hold my hands up. I shouldn't have done it. And I didn't realize.
Yeah.
And I will pay this fee. And also,
it's a bit like the speeding fines I always get, and it's 150 quid. But if you pay it within 14 days, you get it for
you get it. Yeah. Exactly. And also, don't forget, any photographers listening, there's a potential client there. Let's say if you are a property or a food or a wildlife photographer or whatever else, that they could use your images. They obviously want to use your images.
Yeah, so they need images.
Yeah. So rather than going in all guns blazing and saying, right, okay, I'm going to absolutely take you to the cleaners for a copyright infringement case, you say, well, okay, why did you use this? You obviously need images of, you're a contractor who worked on a property. That, why don't you commission me instead?
And then the more bespoke and the more to them. I suppose Kevin Timmons commented, and I know Kevin does a lot of sort of engineering and industrial sort of images as well as product photography, and he says, he sees his images being used around the globe. So obviously in that case, you wouldn't be able to, realistically, if you're based in the UK, you wouldn't say, well, I'll come over and do a shoot for you in Canada or New York, because that would add so much cost on to the company anyway. So in cases like that, I suppose it's worth pursuing for that additional revenue, and you just put that in the hands of a third party. As long as you've got your terms and conditions, that third party then goes forward.
I mean, well, I hope most people are reasonable people, so you can either contact them yourselves. I mean, don't always use a third party infringement company like CopyTrack, PicScout, Image Rights. They're very good, but before you sign up with them, you can try doing it yourself. I've written a letter, for a standard letter, where you just basically replace your name, and it's got all the fees in the letter, basically, that you could send to a client who's potentially infringed your images.
Right.
It's a friendly, non-aggressive letter, which is more educational than threatening. So you basically say, I'm a photographer. I've shot these images. You're using them. You're getting promotional benefit from using these images. and I want to be paid for them, and I'm not going to charge the earth. Some photographers think to themselves, and there's only some who think, you know what, I see this as a perfect storm. I'm going to get every penny that I can out of this client, and if they don't pay up, I'm going to take them to court. Whereas I see it as something else. I see it more as an educational process. Is that the more people you educate, the less this is going to happen.
Yeah.
You may get a new client. Obviously, in some cases, it's non-UK or whatever, or beyond the geographic area that you're working in. But if you're seen to sort of work with that client and you still, I'm not saying that photographers shouldn't charge anything, they should, but don't always sort of think to yourself, oh my God, they're using my images. I'm going to charge them X, Y, and Z. Just think, okay, they haven't done it on purpose necessarily. I'm going to charge them a fee, and I'm going to charge them a fee for not crediting the image. But you know what? I'm not going to take you to court, and I'm not going to charge you extra fees. And if you can settle on this amount, we'll move on. And quite often, I've had clients, infringers who contacted me and said, Graham, thank you, because I didn't realize I couldn't do this. I thought it was just an image I could use. I've been sent it. So thank you for dealing with it reasonably, and let's move on.
Yeah, Carl's just said he's found that many of these companies that chase infringements are quite expensive as a cost per image offering, and they're not very successful at actually settling with the infringer. And then somebody else says, Google has zero interest in protecting the creator's rights once images are uploaded.
No, I mean, a lot of these infringement companies, they do charge a fee, and so they should. We were talking earlier about transparencies. When I started out, photographers shot with transparency. My first job as a photo library was cleaning transparencies for, we used to send images out by transparency. They used to come back and they needed cleaning before we could send them out. So a bit of lighter fluid, scrub them up and send them back out again. And I remember my wife saying to me on a Friday night, are you coming home, Graham? I'd be like, yeah, but I'm waiting for a bike from Canary Wharf to come out, pick up a batch of transparencies before we can send them out for tomorrow's edition of the Times or the Telegraph. But so the digital age, as I said before, did a lot of things. It opened up the world for photographers with regard to marketing, using images, being able to sort of create images rather than having to pay for, processing and everything else that came with transparencies, creating duplicate images. If you had an original image, you had to create duplicates. So the digital age created so much, but also created infringement. So if you'd have said to me that once 20 years ago, there would be companies set up purely to create a profit from photographers' infringements, no one would have believed you. This is like something like what?
Yeah.
And in response to your question is that yes, these companies who deal with photographers who work on infringements on their behalf, they do an amazing job. They really do. But I do think they do go in rather heavy-handed sometimes, and they have so many cases, and they end up looking a bit silly, if you want the honest truth, because they send a letter and they charge quite large fees, and if the person who's infringed says, well, do you know what, I can't afford to pay this, or I'm not going to pay it, I'm going to pass it on to my legal representative, my solicitor or whatever, and they're going to say, well, take me to court. And then what happens is Copy Track and all these other, they don't follow up on it. So there's no follow-up. Whereas if a photographer does it themselves and thinks, okay, I'm going to contact these people myself, they may get less money, and they may charge less money, but, money in your back pocket is better than nothing at all.
Yeah, totally. And I think, obviously, like you were saying, things have changed. I remember, when I first started doing weddings, 2004, when I left the Navy and started my first business, wedding photography business, we actually make more money from reprints than we would for the actual wedding because people couldn't get the images. They weren't on likes of Facebook because Facebook didn't come about till, I don't know, 2008 or something like that. So people weren't digitally swapping the images around. So you do a wedding and your reprint order would often double the amount of what you charge for the wedding. You would make a fortune in reprints and you'd be sending them out all over the UK, in little mounts posted out. But obviously now things are changing and you don't want it to get to a point where you're constantly worrying about where your images are because there will be a percentage of images go. But I think that the main thing is that you minimize it, educate people, have a proper contract. It'd be interesting to see how many people actually do have contracts and utilize contracts if you put that into the chat. And then
I'm putting my daughter through university, so I hope someone got to buy some, got to pay for it somehow.
And then Hannah's just asked a good question here. Can she pay? Can the third party license be actually sort of negotiated? So if the hotel commissions the photographer to take the photos, and they know that it's going to be used by the decorators that did the refurb of the hotel, would she write that? Would that be put into can you make you have that contract, but then you have fees for third party usage? Do you think that because I suppose that way you guarantee that you're going to get the money up front anyway, as opposed to going down the route of demanding money off somebody and potentially upsetting someone and creating more work for yourself later on down the line?
I think with a contract, what I suggest is you give 2 licenses with your contract. So for example, you give the license to the company who's commissioned you. Let's say, for example, that company wants to use a PR agency or a design agency to use those images in various ways. So you almost give 2 licenses. With regard to that question, is that this is a totally separate company. I would say is that they had to pay you. They haven't commissioned you as the initial photographers. So if they want to use those images, they're getting commercial benefit from those images. So I'm not saying you would charge them necessarily the full fee. You've charged them for the initial commission, but you would put in your terms and conditions. This is a classic no third party use, and this is where issues happen. So that hotel passes them on to that person, and they use them and they get into trouble for copyright infringement. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you have it in your initial contract, educate, and can't pass them on to this other person, then that client, that becomes a client of yours. They might want to use you for further commissions. They also may need those images for their own promotional use. But please, as a property photographer, don't just release your images to these other people. If they want them, commission you, for God's sakes. You're a property photographer, and if they want to use them and they're perfect with them, then they have to pay for them. Mm. And if you're worried about fees, go on to Getty Images, go onto their price calculator and say, right, okay, they want to use them for website, they want them for 10 years or 5 years. This is the price, and this is what you charge them. Mm-hmm. Or the other way of doing it is charge them 50% of your initial commission. That's what a lot of photographers do. Is say you've and then you say, okay, this is a reuse. In fact, I'm not reshooting the images. I'm not processing the images, so there's no extra work for me as such. So I will give them to you as 50% of the original fee. But it's not part of the original brief. This person is a third party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think at the initial job stage with the hotel, you could say to them that any other interested parties within the images, because if it's like a refurb, you could say, look, if at this point, while the images are taken, because what you can say, you can negotiate with this from a marketing perspective, business point of view. This could be a potential to say, well, hang on a minute, there's the carpet fitters and the decorators, and then obviously the interior designers who provided the settees and the tables and stuff like that. You could say to the hotel, well, we'll do a package, a licensing package for each one of those that they can use it. potentially you could end up with another 3 charges onto that bill at the very beginning, just by finding out the end usage by the client and whoever has a vested interest in that product.
If I was a property photographer, if I was commissioned by, say, a hotel, I would say to that hotel, I'd say, well, who else would be interested in these images? And I would say to them, to the original commissioner, say the hotel commissioned you and say, right, I'll give you a 25% discount on the original fee. And if you give me the contacts of the people who have worked on this building, I will license those images to those contractors who'd worked on this building, and I will give them a 50% discount on the fee that I am charging you. So they are getting to use those images under license. Don't forget, they don't own the images. So under license, they can use those images. You may have 4, or out of one commission, you could potentially have 4 or 5 different clients. And then there's the follow-on work, because those clients may work on other buildings, and they may then say to you, well, actually, I need you to photograph these images as well. So there is such a thing as a shared license. So I don't think photographers should be scared of this. And there might be something after the last year, COVID, the pandemic, is that people are short, companies are short of money. Don't lose a client because you don't want to share a license. You can share a license as long as that other client, the other potential contractor, is willing to contribute and pay towards that, towards your initial fee. But you're not splitting your original fee. You're not saying, okay, I'm going to charge you £2,000 for today. I'm being commissioned by 3 people, so I'm going to charge you a third each. No.
Yeah, you're making extra money from that. Yeah,
extra money. Don't please, as a photographer, don't start thinking, well, I'm going to charge you a third each. No, your original commission is this fee, and then I'm going to charge you a discount for each extra company. That's really important, and it minimizes infringement too, because if then they can't be shared, those images can't be shared, can they? They've already got them. They pay for them.
So if I was a photographer and I'm setting up obviously I can come to yourself and get a copyright contract. So I can get a contract from yourself. You create contracts so that is legally binding. It has all the terms and conditions. Because that would be better than me typing on about having an invoice. You can't use these images with anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, what this came about is at the start of lockdown. I mean, I've had years of experience dealing with photographers and dealing with contracts and copyright issues. And during lockdown, several architectural property photographers said to me, Graham, could you update my terms and conditions? They obviously had far too much time on their hands. They were looking. Photographers don't normally look at their terms and conditions because they're too busy shooting. But I think because they were so quiet, they realised that their contract, their terms and conditions, were leaving them open to copyright infringement. So I wrote something for all photographers. I wrote a specific one for photography for property photographers, and I wrote a more generic one for product photographers, anything other than property, basically, because property does have a very specific type of organics for their contract. So I wrote it, and then typical me wrote it and didn't do anything else about it. And then they all came back to me and said, Graham, you need to promote this, because if every photographer had this same contract, this same set of terms and conditions, it would be really useful. Because if you were pitching for a job and a client said to you, well, actually, these are really unusual terms and conditions. No one else has ever kept the copyright before. No one else has ever said I can't use them for third party. No one else has said I can't stick them in a stock library. And you can say, well, actually, get the next guy in and their terms and conditions will be the same. And I think for architectural and property photographers and anyone else, it was quite useful, because they all had the same set of terms and conditions. And what I've done is I've written them in a way to say that they're educational, rather than being a contract. I've written them in a way that you read it and you think is as much benefit to your client as it is to you, the photographer. So that they read. Some photographers are a bit put off. They go, if I, if I give this to my client, are they going to be put off commissioning me? And I say, well, no, because you're helping them. You're basically giving them the information to say, this is what you can do, and this is what you can't do.
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse as a photographer. I've worked with photo libraries and photographers for years, and I can't imagine it. You have to phone them up and say, well, you've been a bit naughty. You've shared the images, you've given them to this person, or you've done this and done that, and I'm going to charge you this. Or the photographer gets contacted by the original client and says, why are you being difficult? You're charging this third party infringer for using my images. And the photographer is not the bad guy. And if you have a good contract in place in the first place, you can at least, I'm not saying it's going to avoid copyright infringement, because you can't avoid it. I'm going to be honest, it's always going to happen. It's going to happen from the day we switch from transparency to digital. But if you have a good contract in place, or a set of terms and conditions that you can give with your contract, you can say, well, I'm sorry, mate, but you knew, why have you done this? And so that's why I did it. And I should probably, pass it on. But it would be great if every photographer had the same set.
Yeah, it should be like like an industry norm that people, because obviously, within the photography industry, there's a lot of people who bring the industry down by saying, "Oh yeah, I'll do it for £50," or I'll do it and just give away the copyright, and they can just have the images. And obviously, it devalues our services. We're professionals, we're skilled, we spend thousands of pounds on kit, so we need to be rewarded.
You do, and it's only going to go one way. It's going to go down. Whereas if you have a proper contract in place, and you need to value, there's new photographers who are just starting out, but they need to value their services, and they need to be appreciative of the people who've been working for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, who charge a fee for their services. And reducing fees and offering copyright and saying to your client, actually, no, you can have the images, I don't care what you do with them, is devaluing the industry. You can't, because the only way it's going to go down from there is there won't be an industry. Quite simple. Yeah. So having a really,
and I suppose if you got a professional copyright contract, you've got your professional contract, you've got your copyright in place, you pay, I don't know, a couple of £100 for something like that to have the proper legally binding contract done that you use over and over again. That you get one job that saved itself. The cost, and then obviously if you get the additional licensing as well, then it pays for itself, because you don't need to update that every single year.
You don't need to update it at all. And the other thing I offer as well with it, I mean, I'm only saying this because I'm putting Molly through university, and I need I need every penny, Jeff. But no, seriously, I do genuinely think it is useful. And also, if you purchase a copy of the terms and conditions, you get a Graham lifetime. You can phone me whenever you like, and that's worth the money on it. You can phone me up and say, Graham, what do you think about this? Someone's using my images where they shouldn't be, or what do you think about this infringement? How much should I charge for a post-license shoot? I've got 20 years of working in specialist stock libraries, so it all, I give that for free.
But I know, I mean, these quite a few people within my own private group and the Awesome Photographers group has commented, and when I put this post on last week to say that we're going to be doing a live, the amount of comments that went on saying Graham is a top bloke, he's a lovely guy, he's always helpful, so. And so if anybody hasn't got a license, if they need to speak to you, obviously connect with you on LinkedIn. Graham's tagged into this post anyway, so you can just send him a connection request. His website, copyrightcorrect.com, is in the is there on the end there. And you can rewatch this interview if you go back to Creating Successful Photographers. So if you've just joined or you didn't catch all of it, if you go back to my hashtag Creating Successful Photographers, follow that, and then you can rewatch this from the beginning again. It probably takes about 5 minutes because there's a bit of a lag on LinkedIn. But I think that was absolutely fantastic. We had a real good discussion there in the conversation. There's a few people who might be able to pop back and answer some of their
Jeff,
questions
is
a
there
little
any
bit more.
questions? I mean, ask them to contact me through LinkedIn or whatever. I will happily answer them. So, you know, if they haven't answered all their questions, please ask them to drop me a line.
That's fantastic. And yeah, a couple of people. John said thanks. He's got to shoot off. Michael, terrific information. Thank you, Jeff and Graham. So it's good. You know, it's all about educating photographers. Alan Green, great to hear from Graham, and thanks. He's a fabulous guy. And I know that you were helping Alan in the group the other week, weren't you? Because you'd put a post about somebody, a third party, using his images. So really appreciate it. Kevin Timmers saying thanks again there. Brilliant. Thank you, Kevin. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Maybe we'll do another one next on talking about stock libraries. I think we have potentially set something up for that, just to keep photographers educated. If you do have any questions, guys, if you need a contract looking over, anything like that, then do get in contact with Graham. I know Graham is not going to jump down your neck and start the hard sell. He's a really nice bloke. He's here to help. Obviously, he's like me, he makes a living. So, you know, if you're going to get a professional contract done, couldn't ask for a nicer guy to do it. So really appreciate your time, Graham. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, mate.
Thank you.
And thanks, guys.
Cheers, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you.